JD Vance, the US Vice President, is due to speak soon.
To the Prime Minister of Pakistan and to Field Marshal Munir, who were both incredible hosts. And whatever shortcomings in the negotiation, it wasn't because of the Pakistanis, who did an amazing job and really tried to help us and the Iranians bridge the gap and get to a deal. We have been at it now for 21 hours, and we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement. We've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on. And we've made that as clear as we possibly could, and they have chosen not to accept our terms. Questions?
Sir, Nick Robertson from CNN. Precisely what have they rejected here? Can you help us understand it a little bit?
Well, I won't go into all the details because I don't want to negotiate in public after we've negotiated for 21 hours in private. But the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations. Again, their nuclear program, such as it is, the enrichment facilities that they had before, they've been destroyed. But the simple question is, do we see a fundamental commitment of will for the Iranians not to develop a nuclear weapon, not just now, not just 2 years from now, but for the long term? We haven't seen that yet. We hope that we will. Jen.
Was there a framework on anything? And also, did the Iranian frozen assets come up? And did you reach any conclusions on those frozen assets?
We talked about all those issues, Jen, and we talked about a number of issues beyond that. And so certainly those things came up. But again, we just could not get to a situation where the Iranians were willing to accept our terms. I think that we were quite flexible. We were quite accommodating. The president told us, you need to come here in good faith and make your best effort to get a deal. We did that. And unfortunately, we weren't able to make any headway. Preston.
Mr. Vice President, how often did you communicate with President Trump throughout the negotiations? There were reports that there were multiple rounds where there were breaks in between negotiations. How often did you communicate with the president throughout those rounds, and what was he saying as you were going through these negotiations that you said fell short?
Yeah, obviously we were talking to the president consistently. I don't know how many times we talked to him, a half dozen times, a dozen times over the past 21 hours. We obviously also talked to Admiral Cooper, to Pete, to Marco, to the entire national security team. We talked to Scott Bessent a number of times. So look, we were constantly in communication with the team because we were negotiating in good faith. And we leave here with a very simple proposal, a method of understanding that is our final and best offer. We'll see if the Iranians accept it. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President, where does this leave the Strait of Hormuz?
Did you going back to war, sir?
Okay, that was the US Vice President JD Vance talking after a marathon 21 hours, he said, of discussions with the Pakistan negotiating team and with Iran, and essentially saying that after those 21 hours, unfortunately, they are now leaving Pakistan with no deal. We go back to the US without a deal. Let's go straight to Al Jazeera's Osama bin Javed, who is in the Pakistani capital near the venue of those talks. So there we go. That is the outcome of these talks. What did you take away from that statement from the US Vice President?
Well, it appears that after all of the effort that was put in, there is no deal. There is an understanding on the table that you can take out from that statement, that there is something on the cards that the Vice President says that is their best and final offer. And I think that is something which would, if you were an optimist, giving you some hope that there is still the negotiations process is not dead. I was speaking to a source just before we heard that the Vice President is going to be making a statement. And they told me that, well, the good thing is that there is no breakdown, but the bad thing is that there is no breakthrough. And according to the Vice President, well, the bad thing is that they're leaving without a deal. During these talks, it was never going to be easy. We were hearing from various diplomats, various sources, and there was very little concrete information coming out. So there was the first round, and the second round. So we believe there were about 5 rounds, and after every single one of them, there were exchanges of notes between these two sides. So it appears that there is some sort of a wider framework that both sides have come towards. I think there is a proposal and a counter proposal from what we gather from JD Vance, and there's not been an agreement. So now we'll have to see what the Iranians have to say about it, because the sources that we were speaking to during the day, they were of the view that the United States is asking for maximalist positions, especially when it came to the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians are not willing to budge on that, and they say that they've been talking about multiple issues, including the nuclear program, including their influence in the region, including other issues regarding the economics of all of this, because the Iranians have been insistent about an asset unfreeze from the United States as well. So it appears that there has been some movement, because if they were to break down completely, that would have happened much earlier. So going in, you heard from Bagher Kalibaf saying that this is only going to be successful if there is an asset unfreeze and the issue of the Lebanese ceasefire. That has not transpired. We believe from our sources that there is some indication of an agreement with Israel that it is not going to bomb the capital Beirut, and is going to continue its operations in the south. But again, this is all drip information that we were getting from some sources. So we'll have to wait and see on the Iranian version of events. And then obviously the interlocutors who were the Pakistanis, diplomats that I've been speaking to tell me that there's been tremendous effort that has been put into just bringing these sides to the table. A historic day where they, for the first time since the 1979 revolution in Iran, were able to bring such high-level people face-to-face with each other.
Osama, what should we read into the fact that no mention was made of whether there will be any more talks, when there might be more talks? Do we take that as a positive sign or a negative sign?
Well, it will all depend on the other side, because right now we've heard from the Americans, and JD Vance is leaving by saying this is their best and final offer. So there is an offer on the table. I think that we can take away from it. Now, he's saying that they were not able to make progress because it appears that they have not moved from that offer that they made. So whether this was an offer that they came with to begin with, whether this was an offer that transpired during those multiple rounds of negotiations, where there was a give and take from the sources that we were talking to in the government, they were telling us that there is their push is that unless there is a compromise, unless both sides are willing to give and take, these things cannot move forward. And there was no expectation of a major breakthrough here today because of, you remember how long it took for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, where experts and politicians and nuclear scientists poured over every single line. So it appears that the diplomacy is not dead, but as in the words of the US Vice President, it is unfortunate that they are leaving without a deal.
OK, Osama, we'll leave it there. Osama bin Javed there for us in Islamabad. I just want to recap for anyone who might be joining us right now what we heard there from the US Vice President JD Vance, who, after those marathon talks in Pakistan to bring together a deal between Iran and the US, announced that there was no result in an agreement to permanently end the war as a result of those talks. I'll just quote what he said. "We have been at it now for 21 hours. We've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement." And I think that's bad news for Iran, much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement. Let's bring in Mike Hanna, who is live in Washington, D.C. So, Mike, JD Vance on his way back now to the United States. What should we take away from all this?
Well, is the glass half full or half empty? Very difficult to discern from those brief remarks made by the Vice President. And also, let's see when he actually leaves Pakistan, although he says he is on his way back to the United States now. But taking a look at some of the positive aspects, first of all, that the talks lasted for so long indicates that they were indeed substantive, that very substantive issues were discussed, as the Vice President Vance does allude to. In his comment as well, there was a very interesting statement that he made that the U.S. has destroyed Iran's ability to create a nuclear program at this stage. But he said what the U.S. is looking for is a commitment from Iran never to do so. So this has moved away from, OK, you've got to stop your enrichment, OK, you've got to stop developing a nuclear capability, to don't even think about doing it. So this is actually a major issue, because that has completely switched the terms of what was being negotiated about, both before the conflict in the 2 rounds of indirect negotiations that were heard, and quite possibly in the negotiations that have been taking place now. But we are still uncertain whether any form of technical discussion is going on. At one stage, it was said that the technical teams will now meet and discuss very substantive technical issues with regard to the agreement. We do not know whether that has been put on hold at all. And we do not know what is in what Vice President JD Vance said was his final offer, the final US offer. We do not know what was in that. That is an offer that's been left on the table. So there is still a door open to further discussion. But it's very much a basis from what JD Vance said of a take it or leave it to Iran. And as Osama was saying, let's wait and see what the Iranian version of events is before getting a fuller picture as to exactly whether there has been a movement forward or whether this has all fallen apart. One last point. President Trump is at a UFC match in Miami, Florida. He's not there. And interestingly enough, his Secretary of State is also at that same UFC competition. Although we did hear JD Vance saying that he's been in touch with all parties, including the President, the Secretary of State. But still, these events in the last few hours have been unraveling while the President is not actively monitoring the situation, rather being at a UFC match in Miami.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned President Trump, because JD Vance was asked by that journalist during the course of that press conference, how often have you been in touch with the US president? And he said, yeah, several times. He didn't give an exact number, but he said they had been back and forth with the US president. And President Donald Trump saying this evening, whether we make a deal or not, it makes no difference to me. We've already won. I mean, President Trump, at least, sounds like he's really keen to move on from the whole Iran crisis.
Well, it's difficult to get into President Trump's mind, but the fact that he is not actively and constantly monitoring these talks is in itself significant. That his terms put that together with what he said is that the US has already won this war. Whether there's a deal or not doesn't really matter. It does appear as though the president is trying to put all of this behind him. He's looking for an off-ramp, even where there may not be an off-ramp in place, given the fact that there may be no agreement to these so-called negotiations. But it does appear from the fact that he's not directly monitoring what is happening to the fact that he's fairly dismissive of the chances of getting a complete agreement, saying it doesn't matter because the US has won the war already. There does appear to be a real desire on the part of President Trump to move on, to take an exit ramp that he chooses, saying, yes, well, we've won the war, let's go on. We'll let the Iranians look at the negotiations, we'll carry on talking, but basically the war is over. So there does appear to be that element to it.
And Mike, while we didn't actually hear from the Vice President exactly what the proposal was that they had put forward, which the Iranians had rejected, we did over the course of the day get the sense, or according to rumors at least, that the Strait of Hormuz was one of the big issues that was the sticking point. Where is the US stance, at least ahead of these talks, on the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, we've had various versions from President Trump himself. At one stage, President Trump was saying the Strait of Hormuz is of no interest whatsoever to the United States. It doesn't need the oil that passes through there, and it's up to other countries that use that oil to police the Strait of Hormuz and to sort out that conflict with Iran. However, a few days after that, he was saying that the Strait of Hormuz is front and central to the U.S. demands, and if the strait is not kept open, then there can be no negotiations. So we simply do not know where the president stands on this, because he's been giving two totally separate positions in the course of the past 10 days alone. And in the course of the day, we had reports from the Pentagon saying that U.S. ships did pass through the Strait of Hormuz untouched by the Iranian defenses. There has been some dispute about that, but that's what we heard from CENTCOM as well as the Pentagon. So for President Trump, it would appear it depends where he is when he's asked. Is the Strait of Hormuz a potential sticking point in any negotiation? 10 days ago, it wasn't. In the last few days, yes, it has been central to that. But it does appear that these talks, from what the vice president was saying there as well, centered very heavily on the nuclear aspect of the US-Iran relationship. And in particular, as I said, that very amorphous concept that not only are they looking for an end to Iran's nuclear enrichment, even be it for peaceful purposes, which Iran insists it is and always has been, that they are looking for something a little bit more fundamental, and that is a commitment to never seek a nuclear program, which, once again, as I said a little bit earlier, changes the parameters of this discussion very, very substantially. And if that is indeed in the document that JD Vance says that he's left them, the Iranians can take it or leave it, in all probability, with a clause like that, that document would be left sitting on the table. So very difficult to glean exactly what is happening here, given the various positions we've had from the US government, and given the fact at this particular stage, we have not heard from the other parties to the discussions yet, or indeed the mediators sitting in between from the Pakistani leaders.
Yeah, let's talk about the mediators, the Pakistan mediators, and the role that they've played, because before he left, JD Vance said whatever the shortcomings of the negotiations, it wasn't because of the Pakistanis, who did an amazing job really trying to help us, and the Iranians bridge the gap and get to a deal. But it wasn't to be, obviously. The Pakistanis played a crucial role in even bringing about the ceasefire in the first place. What is this going to mean for them, that things seem to have come to a halt at this stage?
I think we've got to be very careful with qualifying our positions on this. It wasn't to be at this particular point in time, at the moment when President Vance was saying that we're going back to the United States. This discussion, this negotiation has been all filled with all sorts of twisting roads and various versions of what was said, and various versions of what plans have been given to the other, and even various versions of what the basis of these negotiations was actually on. We do not know that, because there's confusion about what President Trump thought he was exactly accepting when he agreed to these negotiations taking place, when he agreed to the ceasefire being put in place. So it is a very, very fundamental shifting moment. But to get back to your question, the Pakistani mediators have been absolutely crucial in this. It's hard to see another another country that could have got these parties together, not only get them together in terms of separate talks, as the Omanis did, for example, but to get them into the same room talking face to face. That is a massive achievement. And whatever has come out of this particular round of negotiations, the one thing that remains very clear, also given what Vice President JD Vance said, is that this channel, this funnel of potential negotiation remains open. The Pakistan mediators are not going to go away and be dropped by the wayside, as Vice President JD Vance is making very clear there. So that avenue remains, and that's a very important aspect in all of this, because if the baby is being thrown out with the bathwater at the moment, as the Vice President of the US with his team walks away from the negotiations, what hasn't been thrown out is the mediating channel. That has been made very clear, and that is a very important thing to bear in mind as this process moves ahead in one way or the other.
OK, Mike, thank you. Mike Hanna, our correspondent there in Washington.